coming. And tonight we are honored to have Thomas Goodwill. He's on the board of the Fenton Historical Society, and he's an author of 3 different books that he will tell you about. And so please welcome Tom Goodwill.
That was supposed to be lucky, Tom. Well, we put this slide up just so that we'd have something up there. So I'm going to back it up a little bit because I wanted to show you that this is your old clubhouse, right? Don't kill me here. This is on 2nd Street. The Norden Club? Yeah, it was right about where the post office is now. Okay, I'd like to do just a real quick poll. How many people here actually went to Celoron Park when it was an amusement park? Oh, good. That's going to kind of date you, since the park has been closed for 60 years. If the dinner didn't put you to sleep, I hope I don't push you over the edge. Okay, because we have quite a number of people of a certain age, how many of you have ever walked into a room and you're starting to talk to somebody and they're already talking, so you wait your turn very politely and then you forget what you were going to talk about? Yeah, I do it all the time. The reason that I bring that up is because as we go through these slides, I may gloss over something that you want to know more about. Please don't hesitate to raise your hand and ask a question. That's the time to do it, because otherwise you'll forget and I'll forget and we'll just go home early tonight. That's not supposed to be a bad thing. Okay, this, you'll notice that this is not all directly Celoron Park. I'm also throwing in Jamestown and a little bit of things that happened in the country at the same time. It's to try to give you a little bit of background of the park and the people in it. So William Broadhead was a guy that was born over in England, and he came to America and he started doing some work as a blacksmith, but then he found clothing to be a better trade for him. Also totally unrelated, the first train to Jamestown came here in 1860. And that's approximately what the train looked like. So Mr. Hall and Mr. Broadhead and Mr. Tingener got together and they formed the alpaca mills. And their job was to spin yarn into textiles. But Mr. Broadhead decided he was going to retire, and he moved down and started his own business. This is the alpaca mill in its glory, and that was down on Harrison Street, where some of you may remember the Jamestown worsted mills were down there. That came after the alpaca mills. You can see that this is a wooden building. This is Mr. Broadhead and his wife. Her name is Lucy Cobb, and her father was owned a snath factory, and they got together doing that. They had, among their children, they had 2 sons, Almut and Sheldon. Did you know Almut? I wasn't sure. I've never had that reaction when I said Almut. This is a picture of Sheldon, and yes, it is spelled D-E-N, and he seemed to be the nuts and bolts sort of guy. He would be the guy that took care of the books, and he was not the idea man. That was his brother Alan. So, backing up now, the Jamestown Worsted Mills then became Hall and Company because Broadhead was no longer with them. I apologize, I'm having a little trouble seeing this because it's kind of small and I'm kind of old. At the same time, they completed the Buffalo and Jamestown Railroad into Jamestown. And at this same period of time, the factories were trying to do their thing and earn as much profit as they could, and the workers were doing their thing, trying to make as much money as they could. So they had a lot of labor unrest during that period, as they were struggling for power. About this time, the Sherman House was built. That was on the southeast corner of 3rd and Cherry. Covenant Manor is on that site now. And that's what the Sherman House looked like. Unfortunately, that was replaced by the new Sherman House, and it was supposed to be fireproof. Didn't work out that way. The buildings on the other side of the, oh, I'm sorry, you don't see it, I do. The Sherman House is on the right, and across the street are the Goki buildings, and behind that was the Goki Shoe Factory. So in 1883, the street railway was organized, and John T. Wilson was the president. He owned a lumber company, and C.R. Lockwood was the secretary. We got our first streetcar in Jamestown, and it operated between the boat landing and the Sherman House. Now, back in those days, the boat landing was a hub of transportation. We had boats coming in, and now we had a trolley that would connect people to downtown Jamestown. Wasn't a real fancy type of thing, just 2 horsepower. About this time, Jamestown was incorporated as a city, and the Chautauqua Lake Railroad was completed. That went from Jamestown to Mayville, and it was on the eastern side of the lake. It means a whole lot, something different nowadays, but this was the time of the so-called gay 90s. In this case, it was referring to the people that were having fun. Well, I guess it does today too. But. So we had industrialization. Factories were growing all over the place. Our area population was expanding. So because of that, we had to have more public transportation. The public transportation also spurred us to have trolley parks, and Celoron was a trolley park. Another trolley park on Chautauqua Lake was up at Midway, and where Chautauqua Lake Campgrounds is now used to be Sylvan Park. Electricity was just coming into being, and they used it for the street railway, and they started around June of 1891. It was Chautauqua County's first electrified system. Changing gears, Prendergast Point was purchased. Can somebody other than Karen tell me where Prendergast Point was? You're sitting on it. Before it was called Celoron, it was Prendergast Point. They changed the name to Celoron with 2 O's in honor of the French explorer by that name. At about the same time, Ellis Island opened to handle all the new immigrants into our country. Thomas Edison formed General Electric. And the Allen Opera House was destroyed by fire. Allen Opera House is the same building that is now Jamestown Little Theater. And believe it or not, the building was completely gutted. The entire inside was gone. All that was left was the brick walls. And they rebuilt it using the old brick walls. Jamestown began construction on a sewer system. As you build population, you've got to have ways to provide people with basic necessities, and that would include water, sewer, electricity, in Jamestown, natural gas. And you got to pave the streets. So that was also taking place. The first picture postcards came out at about the same time, and they were first seen at the Columbian Exposition in Chicago. One of our heroes showed up at the Columbian Exposition. Almond Broadhead. He went there and he made a purchase of a double-decker streetcar. That was kind of an unusual purchase. You know, everybody had streetcars, but the double-decker was really something to behold. He called it the Columbia after the exposition, and that's what it looked like. It probably wasn't quite as drab as the black and white photo shows. It was the trolley car that everybody wanted to ride to come out to Celoron, because that's basically where it ran. It made other runs, but it normally went from Jamestown to Celoron and back again. And I would imagine most everybody wanted to sit up on the upper deck. 1893 was also a time of serious depression, both economically and I'm sure that it was psychological depression too. Businesses and banks had failed, but not Celoron. Celoron decided, well, we've got a hotel and a dock, and now we've got the street railway system to connect us. We're good to go. This is an early photo of the first dock. It's not the magnificent dock that we saw in later years. Anybody but Karen? I have to keep eliminating Karen because she knows all of this stuff. Probably a lot more than I do. Anybody know what this building is? The one in the foreground? It was right about here, and it was in later years called the Lakeview Hotel. So it was one of the very first buildings and one of the very last buildings. Off in the distance you can see the Hotel de Celoron, and to the left you can see the the bathhouse. This is the Hotel de Celoron. This is actually a somewhat later picture of it. It was right by the lake, just the other side of Dunham Avenue. And the reason that I know that this is a later picture is because the tower does not have a point on it. That burned off one year, and they just never replaced it. Here's another view. The lake would be to the left. Celoron also had an outdoor theater. And I'm going to have to be honest with you, this picture confuses me because it shows the outdoor theater in the same photo with the Ferris wheel. But to my knowledge, the outdoor theater was moved inland before they got the Ferris wheel. So I don't know how they did that. But that's what it looked like. They turned it into a bandstand and moved it over here to Dunham Avenue. It'd be very close to the boulevard. Jamestown tried to become the county seat, Mayville said, no, that's not happening. And then at the end of the year, they finally completed the floor at the original dance hall. That was at the east end of the park. Now, for those of you that raised your hand earlier and said that you had been to the park, did you imagine that they had a lot of attractions on the other side of Dunham? In my day, that was used for parking. So I was quite surprised when I did the research to find out that they had another half of the park on the other side of the street. So the long building on the left was the original dance hall. That was used as a picnic pavilion and a dance hall, pretty much a general meeting area. And right now it's, if you know where the Desi Arnaz band shell is, that's where the dance hall used to be.
Wasn't that called the Pure Ballroom?
No,
Oh.
no, it wasn't, but I will get to that, but that was the predecessor to all of this.
Okay.
In 1895, they laid the cornerstone for the new City Hall building. For us, that was the old City Hall. Many of you can remember it, well, maybe you don't remember it looking like this. You probably remember it being grayish black color. But that's the sandstone. Am I right, Karen? Is it sandstone? Ah, good, I got it. Anyways, the Prendergast Library was also a black color at one time, and they did whatever they had to do to clean it. And I was amazed to see the color of the stone underneath. Well, the old City Hall was the same way. So now, Celoron Park had a merry-go-round. Doesn't every amusement park have a merry-go-round? Any guesses as to where the merry-go-round was? Where's Jack Bailey? Do not guess because you've read the book. The original merry-go-round was located on the other side of Dunham Avenue. And that's what it looked like. They had very few photos available, so I was quite surprised to get this one. I actually have a friend that collects photos, and he's got deeper pockets than I do, and he lets me copy the pictures that he buys. This particular carousel was made by the E. Joy Morris Company, and I couldn't find the actual photo of our merry-go-round, but this is a merry-go-round that the same company built. You notice that everything is so intricately carved. We also had a Tom Thumb Railroad. That was over at that time in the east end of the park. We had an auditorium. Can you imagine this place? Allegheny Avenue is right out here. It would be on this side of Allegheny Avenue, right at the corner. The place was huge. The capacity has been given as either 6,000 or 8,000. I suppose it depended on the type of event and how quickly you could shove everybody in. They used it for political and religious conventions. The summertime, they used it for roller skating. The wintertime, they had little windows at the bottom, and they would flood it and let it freeze, and it became an ice skating rink. And the first furniture exhibition was held in that location. The balcony could hold 1,500. That's a lot of people all by itself, just in the balcony. So getting back to what we had, we also had a baseball field, and that was pretty much right behind me. It wasn't a slouch. You could see the grandstand, but then along both sides of the grandstand, you can see some low buildings. They were connected to the auditorium, And they actually had ice skating races down those hallways. The halls were actually used for advertising posters and artwork and that type of stuff. So in 1895, the Cotton States held an exhibition of their own. And this is the reason that I was a little confused about that picture, because they hadn't bought the Ferris wheel yet, but they had already moved the theater inland. So maybe somebody can explain that to me someday. One of the things that they showed at the exhibition was a Ferris wheel. It's called a Ferris wheel because the person that invented it was a guy named Ferris. Our wheel was a Ferris wheel, but we didn't call it that. We called it the Phoenix wheel. And the reason that we called it the Phoenix wheel is because it was made in Phoenixville, Pennsylvania, at the Phoenixville Metal Company. So now, I had told you that they moved the dome-shaped theater from the lake over to here. That original theater was actually built on stilts over the water, because if nothing else, they managed to make as much use of the room as they could. So the original indoor theater cost $36,000. Today's money, that's nothing. It was then. And it was a good-sized building. It was 168 feet by 40 feet. I'm sorry, by 82 feet, and it was 40 feet high. And it could hold 2,000. And that's what it looked like. That was over here. Honestly, I haven't walked the shoreline recently, but just this side of Dunham Avenue, there was an area of land that stuck out. It was almost a rectangular shape, and that was part of the original theater. Here's another view of that same theater, so you can see how it's right out there on the water. And that's the interior of that theater. Of course, it had vaudeville, opera, just about whatever theater venues were around at that time. I don't know if this is true or not, but it wouldn't surprise me. They sold 4,000 tickets on the first day, but they only had 2,000 seats. What was it that they used to say at Chautauqua, to do the Chautauqua slide so that all the latecomers could slide into the benches? I don't know if they still do that. I haven't been there in a long time. So the Ferris wheel got moved to Celoron, and it was called the Phoenix wheel, and it weighed 53 tons. It was about 11 stories tall. That's quite a size wheel. And that's what that looked like. That was over on the other side of Dunham Avenue also. Just about where the parking lot is for Lucille Ball Park. The cars, you can barely see it in this photo, but the cars had benches in them, and each bench would hold 10 to 12 people. That's a little bit closer view of the entrance and exit of the Ferris wheel. And here's a chance to look through the spokes and see Fluvanna over on the other side. So a guy named Charles Johnson decided that the Celoron Hotel was doing well, so he would build one as well. And he built it right on the corner of Dunham and Boulevard, right where the log cabin is now. And that was called the Imperial Hotel. Oh, now we get into some politics, because we had that nice big amphitheater for people or auditorium for people to visit. So in August of 1896, William Jennings Bryan came here, and he decided to try his hand at running for president. He's a fine, upstanding man. but he lost. So it was a battle of the Bills, and if anybody had to guess, I would have said Bill would win, and Bill did. The first American subway was started in Boston. Yeah, come on. Trains, not the sandwich place. I had a friend that said, when we lived down in Florida, he says, I can't believe it, they're going to put a subway in here with all this sand. I guess you had to be there. Okay, so over in this area was a gravity railroad, which is kind of a fancy way of saying a roller coaster. Didn't it look like this? And you may or may not have known that, but they had a gravity railroad similar to this at Chautauqua. It only lasted maybe 1 year. And then there's this Professor Wallace. He says, hold my beer. Decided he was going to jump from a tower into some water. You see him up there on top of that ladder? He's just a little tiny dot. I think he was worried about becoming a dot himself. Mike and I were talking a little while ago about maps of Celoron Park, and this was a map from 1897. It may be a little inaccurate, but I'll give him a break. The hotel that it shows in the middle on the right, I don't know where that is. I've never found a hotel in the research that I've done. So it shows the Celoron Hotel right out by the lake, and then in front of the Ferris wheel it shows the other hotel, which was the Imperial. And now you can see where the theater is standing out over the water, and the old theater. The old theater became a bandstand. They were going to add another theater to it later. But this gives you some idea as to where some of the things were located. The steamboat company, that was the company that was taking care of Chautauqua Lake. It carried 500,000 passengers in 1900. Which means that other people had to have ridden more than once, because the Jamestown population was only 22,000. And out of that 22,000, Broadhead Mills employed 1,200. Then New York City had the first electric bus, so you knew something else was going to have to happen. Bill lost again. You notice, if you're watching his hairline, he lost to McKinley again. But McKinley was assassinated in Buffalo. That was at the Pan American Exposition. And it happened to be attended by Helmut Broadhead. I don't know if he just liked going to these places, but he always seemed to buy stuff when he was there. So he purchased some small steamers and used them on ferry service on the lake. I only have a picture of one of them, but it was representative of the others. This one was called the Celoron by chance. The Jamestown, Chautauqua, and Lake Erie Railroad got extended up to Westfield. That was a big deal in those days. And in February of 1903, the Bear Pit was over in the east end of the park, and it was basically just a hole in the ground, and they had a railing around it, and they put bears down in the hole. So that's what the Bear Pit looked like. Just beyond that would be the zoo. We had several different types of animals here. The bear pit filled with water, and one of the bears was called Big Tom, and he was paddling for all get out because he didn't kind of have a choice. And the city of Jamestown took possession of the water system. Originally, right out here on the lake was a water crib. And the water was pumped from there into the city. And then later, the water was pumped from the boat landing. And Celoron Park added a figure-8 coaster. I told you that the auditorium was on this side of Allegheny. The figure-8 coaster was on the other side of Allegheny, and to its right is where the Lakeview Hotel was. So the Chautauqua Traction Company started making regular runs from Jamestown to Chautauqua, and the first car left the Sherman House on the 4th of July. Now the Sherman House was the one that I told you was at the corner of this southeast corner of 3rd and Cherry. Celoron got a new attraction called the Loop, and it was what it sounds like. They ran it for several months, or a couple of months, and they had several thousand people ride it, but then they had an accident where a couple of girls were in a car, and when the car got to the top of the loop, the car accidentally hit a piece of wood, and it sent them out, and unfortunately they passed away. It's not surprising when you take a look at that loop-the-loop. Now this one's not ours because it was here for such a short time. I don't know of any photos of it. But that's about the position that the car was in when it stopped suddenly. And back in those days they didn't have safety harnesses. They were just counting on centrifugal force. The first car that came into Jamestown from Warren was car 54, so you don't have to ask where car 54 is anymore. Mike's over there looking at me. Mike's all of 29, and he's saying, I don't get it. It was a TV show about a police car. So this is what the Humphrey House used to look like. That was at the corner of South Main Street and Taylor. And if you look all the way to the right, that's the intersection of Harrison Street at that time. And of course, it was a joyous occasion for everybody. Got a chance to see a car come up from Warren. In 1905, the Scenic Railway opened up. They no longer had the loop-the-loop, so they opened up the Scenic Railway, which is, once again, another type of roller coaster. And that's what the building looked like. I've seen very few photos, but the ones that I've seen showed it was almost elevated on the east side of Dunham Avenue. And it would drive around over the zoo and the Tom Thumb Railroad and so on. This is just a stock picture of a different railway. I just wanted to show it to you so you'd have an idea that it really was just a roller coaster. And here's another one. In 1905, they removed the steamboat dock and replaced it with another one. It's 150 feet long and 32 feet wide at the end. Look at that. They parked the steamboat out there for those that are either too tired or too lazy. There's a railroad track going out there. That's for the trolley to go right to the steamer. They could put people on it and bring it in, or they could take them out for the ride home. And I told you about a water crib. That tower is built on the water crib. I'm losing track. I thought I already said this, but the Chautauqua Traction Company opened up. Oh, they opened up from Mayville to Westfield before we had just gotten as far as Mayville. So that's what it looked like when they arrived in Westfield, to great fanfare. And of course, in Westfield, they had other connections so they could get to Buffalo and Erie. The Celoron Amusement Company purchased the park, and I believe that was the Broadheads. They owned the Celoron Amusement Company. In 1908, the Model T showed up, and we had to replace the the scenic railway with a Coney Island tickler. Sounds like a creepy guy that's hiding in the shadows, doesn't it? I think I'd take the creepy guy rather than the original design of this tickler. On the left, you can see the round cars. They go up to the top, and then you play the Plinko game, except that you're riding in this car. Can you imagine how that would have jarred you? They toned it down for Celoron, though. That's not toned down a lot. But the car would come down, and when it hit, of course, everybody would be jostled together, and then it would turn sideways, and then you'd get jostled another way. So if you weren't friends with your neighbor, you soon would be. So Ford invented the Model T, the scenic railway was in place, and now the hotel, the Celoron and Imperial Hotel, were unified under one manager, John Penfold. Oh, look at that. William Jennings Bryan lost again to another Bill. William Howard Taft. Oh. You've been watching his hair, haven't you? So in 1909, Ellen and Sheldon Broadhead bought out the Jamestown Lighting and Power Company. That was on Race Alley. Anybody here remember Race Alley? No? Back in the old days, the river split down in Brooklyn Square into races. And Race Alley ran from what is today Harrison Street up to the outlet, or to the river, and that was called Race Alley. It was just about between, I'm going to say Friendly's because everybody remembers Friendly's, between Friendly's and the Jock Shop. That's where Race Alley was. This came up just the other day because my granddaughter's fiance works at Anderson Screw Products, and they used to be on Race Alley. So I had to explain to him where that was. He's like 22. I've got shoes on that are 22. Captain Jack Dallas. Can you imagine a better name for a pilot? He flew an airship at Celoron Park, and they launched it from the baseball field, which was generally in this area. People got a little bit annoyed with him because he fiddled with that thing all day long, as if his life depended on it or something. He finally got off the ground at 7:30 in the evening. Big flight, flew across to Flavanna and came back. And he's happy for the came back part. It was just a bag of hydrogen gas, and I had a gasoline engine. The flight took all of 15 minutes. Didn't even have time to get out the peanuts. There it is. Can you imagine flying that thing? As I understand it, he steered it by leaning one way or the other. And even in that 15 minutes, they managed to get another shot of him. This must have been on his way to Flavanna. In March of 1910, the lake level went up. This was before they did as good a job with the Warner Dam as they have in recent years. There was a period where the lake overflowed just about every year. So the steamboat dock was in danger again. And then in April, the winds and rain and water took out the dock, and all that left was the pilings. And the ticket office was found down in the outlet. And that's a distant shot of the dock. That is not the ticket office, I don't believe. I think the ticket office was smaller and closer to land. Unfortunately, in 1910, William Broadhead passed away. Pressing too many buttons too fast. This was his house. I believe it was designed by Aaron Hall. Come on, Karen. You don't know? I've given her. I'm sorry?
Broadhead House.
Yes, that was the Broadhead House, and luckily that house is still there today, but it's starting to show its age. So the Broadheads, the remaining Broadheads, the sons, built a substation at 101 Washington Street. Can anybody picture where that is now? Building's still there. It's now part of the National Comedy Center. It's the brick building right next to the bridge. It's been there that long. What they did was they generated the current down at the boat landing. Most of you remember the great big brick building that was right next to the 6th Street Bridge. That was originally the powerhouse for not only for the trolleys, but later on to electrify all around Chautauqua Lake. The company's offices were at 316 North Main Street, so that would be the east side of Main, about halfway up the block between 3rd and 4th. And in 1910, the Bible students paid us a visit. Quite a few, 4,500. And they decided to get wet. They held a mass baptism. I'm not sure if everybody got baptized, but look at the clothing that they're wearing. Can you imagine if you got all that wet? So the Broadhead boys incorporated as Western New York Electric Company. And they supplied power to both sides of Chautauqua Lake. So now all the villages had power that they didn't have before. And Big Tom quit swimming, and they moved him to Yardley, Pennsylvania. And then they sold off the rest of the animals in the zoo. I guess some people would say 1913 was the unlucky 13 because water damaged the park again. The theater, remember that beautiful theater? It got flooded the first few rows, and it was already sitting up above the lake, so for it to flood, it took some doing. The Richmond Hotel, I haven't talked about that one before. That was right at the edge of the lake at Dunham Avenue. It wasn't a very big place. And the streetcar workers went on strike in Jamestown. So here we are in 1913. Things are not going well. The park finally opened on July 20th. If you're from around here, you know that they have a very small season. And they normally would try to get started around Memorial Day. So this put them probably 7 weeks behind. It wasn't bad enough, now we got the federal income tax too. And then also in 1913, Ford is still busy. He's got the assembly line cranked up. And a guy named Harry Illians joined the family business out in Coney Island. The family business happened to be carving carousel horses. His father was Marcus Illians, and he was one of the very best in the world. So they decided, we've had enough of these floods. We're going to have to raise the roadbed for the trolleys. Is there anything that you've seen previously that would tell you that there might be a problem with raising the roadbed? No? So 1913 was the end of the Columbia as far as making runs. You couldn't get under the wires like it needed to. So what they did was they parked it in the trolley barn that was at 2nd and Washington. Later years it was McAllen Drugs, if you ever remember seeing that. They kept it there for about 12 years, and then after Mr. Broadhead died, I'm getting ahead of myself, but after he died, they sold it off, scrapped it. So in 1914, Babe Ruth entered Major League Baseball. The stage floor of the outdoor theater was raised 3 feet. Now you don't have that. There you go. The outdoor theater is the one on the left. The one on the right continued to be used as a bandstand. And it looks like Rocket Ship 7 sitting there. That's the projection booth. They show movies at night, free movies. And the little thing that looks like a swimming pool in the middle was the electric fountain. They'd put on lights and had the water dancing. Wasn't like Las Vegas, but it was a pretty big deal at the time. Then in 1914, Celoron Hotel was completely destroyed. That was the one that was almost to the water on the other side of Dunham. And it also got into the Imperial, which was on the corner of Boulevard. It burned off the top of that, but they later added on to it again. They took away the Coney Island tickler, and they took away the monkey house, not to be confused with Monkey Island or the other Monkey Island. Monkey Island, by the way, was in the center, and it was basically just a scooped out area with a raised area in the center, and that's where they kept the monkeys. It never was that little island out in the water. I don't know how it ever got that name, but the baseball field got flooded again. Pretty soon we're into World War I. And Celoron Park got leased from Celoron Amusement Company by Coney Island. I don't know, but I would suspect that this had something to do with the Illians family at that time. 4th of July, they had 20,000 people come to the park. I see people leaving, so I'm going to try to speed it up before we all fall asleep. It was such a busy day that they had 27 cars constantly ferrying people back and forth to Jamestown. And then in 1920, Babe Ruth was sold from the Red Sox to the Yankees. Women received the right to vote, and that big, beautiful auditorium was destroyed by fire. After the fire, this is all that remained. The building that you see is the merry-go-round that had been moved over from the east side of Dunham over to probably right about in here. There was a new attraction near the Phoenix Wheel called the Cave of the Winds. I can't find anything about that, but what I think it is some type of a fun house. And a guy named George Carr leased the park. began construction on the Greyhound. Where is he? Jack Bailey, just raise your hand. Jack Bailey used to work on the Greyhound. And he was telling me a story about how they would have to go with a hammer and they'd sound the wood. And if the wood was getting punky, they'd have to tell the carpenters to replace parts of the wood. It's quite a system. It was quite a walk, too. That was the Greyhound in its heyday. Celoron Theater was being transformed from a theater to a ballroom. And many national bands appeared. The first time I saw this, I thought, wait a minute, something's wrong. They've got a picture of the Celoron Theater, and they're calling it the Pier Ballroom. That's not the Pier Ballroom. That was a little one-story building. Well, we all tend to look at things through our own perspective. It truly was the Celoron Theater, and they remodeled it. And they put in a nice dance floor. It probably was the place to go. And just to show you a comparison, this is the exterior of the building, so you can see for sure that it's the same building. And that's the interior. And you can see a number of similarities, so they didn't change a whole lot of it. The Bears came back in 1924. There were 2 large brown bears, and they were going to put them in the pit. And the Custer Car Speedway is added as an attraction. Anybody get an idea what that was? They were small, they were basically like dressed out go-karts. So they look a great deal like the Dodgems that we remember, except these were gasoline powered. And this is a stock photo, and I'm trying to figure out if the guy on the right is really Al Capone. There was a suspicious fire and it destroyed the dance hall down at the east end. Where was the lady that asked about the pier? Now do you know? Okay. And we're going to change it up some more too. Oh, William Jennings Bryan is back. This time he's done fighting with all these bills. He's decided to go up against Clarence. So he aided the prosecution in the Scopes trial, and this time he won. Just before all of his hair left. But they overturned it, so he still lost. And he died 5 days after the trial. I've been teasing this guy as kind of a loser, but he was a member of Congress, he was the Secretary of State, he was no slouch. He just didn't seem to be able to quite make it to the big show. They opened up an electric railway over in the Grove for the children. The Grove was the area on the other side of Dunham. And they decided that they're going to put a whole bunch of lights on the Greyhound, but only on the side facing the water, so that everybody over in Savannah could say, oh gee, I wish I was over there. They moved the airplane swing and put it on the island. Now that's the island that people used to like to call Monkey Island, but it was really an airplane swing island. Now it's the bar. So if you happen to go out to the bar, the outer bar, think about what used to be there. Unfortunately, in 1925, Elmet Broadhead died. He was the idea guy. He was the one who came up with all these schemes, kind of like the Lucy of the pair. And his brother Sheldon was the Ethel. On Memorial Day, the park broke the record by 25%. So we're up to 25,000 people in one day. And then, wouldn't you know it, Sheldon Rudd had died the same year. You know what's coming if you see this date. Stock market crashed in 1929. And the Great Depression came in, and some would argue that it never really went away, but the worst of it was felt until 1938. George and Thomas Carr, somebody asked me about that earlier. George and Thomas Carr buying the, oh no, that was somebody else that bought the park. They bought the park, and it included 20 acres. And then on June 13th, now remember the park has only been open for about 2 weeks. The park manager smelled smoke, and as soon as he got into the theater, the ballroom, he found the source of the fire. It didn't take an hour for the whole building to come down. But you got to remember, it was a wooden building built with relatively cheap materials, and it was big like a barn. They didn't have any insurance. And unfortunately, that's what it looked like. And that's what it looked like. And that's what it looked like. The area where, the open area where people are walking, that was concession stands that lined the water, and some of them got taken out too. So that tells you that the wind was coming from the west, as it usually does around here. So they're going to rebuild it. They're going to call it the Castle Gardens for a while. Then they changed it to the beer ballroom again. The old facility was built out over the water and also left a dirt footprint. So they used that as a park later on in a flower garden. But they built the new pier ball, Castle Gardens, in front of that, completely on land. Workers probably were not union labor. None of them were working 24 hours a day. Then they had opening night, and 1,200 people showed up, so they wanted that place. Now this view that you're going to see is from the end of the building. It'd be from this end of the building, and on the left you can see just a little bit of the garden, which I guess is why they called it Castle Gardens for a while. And then when they called it the pier, they had big bands come in. Anybody remember this, the interior of this building? I do, and I was 10 years old. Nobody wants to admit to it. Went there for the music. What I remember is that one end of the building had a bar, and it was separated by a little wall, and then the rest of the building was wide open. In 1932, Franklin Delano Roosevelt showed Billy Bryan just how to do it. William Jennings Bryan couldn't make it, but he decided he's going to show him. We got a new attraction called the bumper cars. And to give you an idea of what the bumper cars looked like at that time, I brought up the patent drawing for it, which was right around within a year or so. Wasn't real spectacular looking. The Leaping Lena ride was shipped to another park, and I have not been able to find a description of that ride other than its title. And they decided to take down the figure-8 coaster, send that on its way. And they replaced it with a parking lot. Now remember that most people were still coming to the park on the trolley system, but more people were getting cars. And because they had cars, they wanted the autonomy. Oh, bad joke, huh? The autonomy. To be able to come and go as they pleased. So they needed a place to park. While Albert Broadhead was alive, the park was dry. It doesn't mean that the hotels were dry, but the park was dry. So they decided to establish a beer garden. It was right in the center of the park. It too was one of the oldest buildings. I used to call it the Heidelberg Pavilion, and you may have seen pictures of it. It's a long building with a second-story porch, and they occasionally had band concerts on that little porch. And then they, of course, sold beer at Castle Gardens. We got Social Security, and the Dodgems got some competition. To my knowledge, the pronunciation of this name is Lassay, almost a French-sounding name. Two brothers owned the business, and the daughter of one of the brothers was also active in the business. You'll see the connection in a minute. And that's what their car looked like, their Lassay auto scooter. That looks more like the old Dodgems that I remember. Minimum wage was $1.25 an hour. There he is. J.G. Campbell purchased the Celoron Park. He was active in the Jamestown Motor Bus Company. And they built Skateland. Anybody go to Skateland? Anybody go to the Skateland dances? I didn't dance, but I played in a band. We used to play there. It was great fun. Now you notice that that building doesn't have any posts in the middle. Because if you skated like I do, those posts would take you out. That's called a bow truss construction. And it allows everything to be up off the ground. Of course, you had to have tickets to get there. The JMBT is Jamestown Motor Bus Transportation Company. And they were hoping Skateland was going to get opened on June 1st, and they did. That was also the last season that they had baseball here. I'm not sure, but I would imagine they took over that land for more parking. Among the baseball greats that appeared here, I'm not much of a baseball fan, but even I recognize these names. Babe Ruth, he's the guy that they named the candy bar for. Yeah. Josh Gibson, maybe Gibson Guitars. That's pretty bad. Satchel Paige, I'm not even going to go there. And Connie Mack. I don't know why they let girls play baseball. Yes, I know, his name was Cornelius. Harry Illians married Florence Lassay. Yeah, whoop-de-doo, huh? They both happened to be born on the 4th of July, different years. I don't know that that enters into anything. The United States entered World War II, and then in 1943, Harry Illians, there's that guy, bought the park for $200,000. Nowadays, you can't buy a house for $200,000. J.G. Campbell was president of Jamestown Motor Bus Transportation, and when Mr. Illians took over, he decided he's going to come in with a big bang. So he brought 3 Ferris wheels over from the New York World's Fair. And that's what they looked like, all lined up. The white structures are the ticket booth areas on Dunham Avenue. So the Ferris wheels would have been over in here. You can also see a little bit of the sign for the Imperial Hotel where that car is parked. He also added a caterpillar ride and a crystal maze, which was kind of like a fun house, I believe. A merry-go-round. Well, we already had a merry-go-round. Now he sold it because he knew of a better one. This was a 1927 Alien Supreme. They only made 3 of them, and to our knowledge, only one exists today. But you can see the animals and how well carved they were. This was all carved by Harry's father, Marcus Aliens. Now this particular picture is when it was in a hotel on Coney Island. But this picture is located here at our park. And it was probably right about in here. Then he also added a Ride-O ride, and I have no idea what that did. And scooter cars, which I believe were LaSalle scooter cars, auto scooters. And 1945 came along and marked the end of FDR. World War II, and another dock at Celoron. The Phoenix wheel was taken down. 1949 happens to be the year I was born. It's not related to this at all. But it was struck by lightning, so they decided they better take it down. I don't know what they did all the rest of the years. So you're supposed to stay tuned now. The average American salary was under $3,000 a year in 1950. Credit cards would help take care of whatever salary you might have left. And Florence LaSalle Aliens passed away. She's buried in Lakeview Cemetery, by the way. And then we got involved in the Korean War, and I told you to stay tuned. In February, Aliens said that they were going to take down the Phoenix wheel for overhauling. And then in June, he said, now we're going to take it down completely and send it out to Pomona. He had different attractions that he was running out there. That's what it looked like in Pomona in 1954. It lasted out there for almost 3 decades, and unfortunately, it met its end when they used a bulldozer to take it down and scrap it. And unfortunately, he sent that beautiful merry-go-round to Pomona as well. So now in 1954, half the homes had televisions. Sit home and watch TV or gather up the family and go to an amusement park. In 1960, that number was almost 90%. Oh, then Disneyland opened. Can you imagine trying to compare a place like Celoron, which was a big place in its time, but compared to a place like Disneyland? Celoron closed early in 1958. Things were not going so awful well. So they took down some of the older rides, and Mr. Aliens decided he was going to make new rides and bring this park back up ship shape. So I had new attractions, a flying saucer ride, a helicopter ride, a magic carpet fun house. Anybody go in there? There's one. The ghost alley. Come on, some of you went into the ghost alley. Yeah, with a rope hanging down and brushes your head. It scared the daylights out of me. So you can see a little bit of the dragon ride and the ghost alley, and the fun house was just to the right of that, I believe. And then the park had just opened for that year, and then a tornado came in. It took out the Greyhound and took a lot of the porch off of the Hotel Imperial. I'm not going to expect you to read all the fine print. I think the headline sure covers it. And then the interior had some pictures, but the pictures don't translate very well when you're making photocopies from newspapers. But it was pretty much a disaster. So Mr. Illians decided he'd had enough, and he put the park up for sale in 1960. He had owned it for 17 years, and he put in lots of major rides and several kiddie rides. He even had an area called Kiddie Land, and he had a penny arcade, which was the old trolley station in the center of the park, and they turned it into a penny arcade. And then in 1962, Mr. Illians passed away. I've only been able to find one picture of him, and it was from a trade journal, 1949 or something like that. I have seen him in some other pictures because he always wore that hat. The new Pier Ballroom, that was the Castle Gardens. The new Pier Ballroom was the little one-story building. Well, not little, but it was a one-story building. And unfortunately, that one went the same way as the other. In a side note, I have a friend who is also a musician, and his band was playing there, and they had left their equipment there, and it wasn't insured. He still talks about it. He's almost 80 years old now. So the Illians heirs sold what was left of the park, and they moved everything down to an area near Pittsburgh. It still had 14 buildings and 2 picnic shelters. And then in October of that year, the Cuban Missile Crisis put us all on the edge of our chairs, even us little kids at that time. In 1963, Evans Skateland became a reality. John and Diane Evans, if you ever got a chance to meet them, they were really wonderful people. And they really took care of the kids when they were running their skating rink. About that same time, the village board in Celoron decided that they would buy the Grove, which is the area on the other side of Dunham Avenue. It was 7 acres, and it only cost $30,000. And then in 1976, at Halloween time, Evans was full of children for a Halloween party. They had about 300 kids there. And a fire broke out, and they managed to get every one of those kids out safely. But unfortunately, the building was destroyed because their concern, as I understand it, it started in the coat room, and their concern was to get the kids out, not get the fire out. So unfortunately, that's what the place looked like after that. They opened up a new place under very similar construction right down by the Washington Street Bridge that is now a storage facility. And then the carousel that Harry Illian's father carved was in California, and they used it there, and then they decided that they were going to sell it. And this guy named John Daniel, whose name I just found out this past week, he bought it and he put everything into storage, and it stayed in storage for 3 decades. Looks terrible, doesn't it? But what I've been told is that's the proper way to store things in California, because everything is dry. So they kept it out of the sun. Imagine it would get really hot in there because it's just a shipping container. They took down the Phoenix wheel. And then in 1988, the Lakeview Hotel burned down. Now they say that was the last of the park buildings. There's some argument. There might have been a little office building over by Dunham Avenue. It was at 33 Allegheny Avenue, and it was 3 stories, but it was wood, and old wood at that. Pierpoint Park was renamed Lucille Ball Park. Actually, it's Lucille Ball Memorial Park, but ballpark sounds good. John Evan passed away in 2006. And we'll take one last look at, this is Almet Broadhead, and he's holding his baby son, William. And I won't read all this stuff to you, but it's a list of some of his accomplishments. Without him, we wouldn't have the transportation system that we had. We wouldn't have electricity for the area. Of course, Celoron Park. He bought Shale Brick Paving Company from his next door neighbor, Jerome Fisher. And he was a sponsor of a couple of hotels as well. So then we roll around into the mid-2015 area, and they decided that it was time to start restoring that carousel. And it took several years, and there was even a PBS show about it. And you can probably see it on YouTube if you look it up. There are the horses. They're back in storage, but at least they're all cleaned up and painted. They look beautiful. I did some further research to find out whatever happened to it now, because you don't restore it and then just leave it in storage. They put it into an amusement park in Gilroy, California. As I understand it, this amusement park is run by the city of Gilroy, and it looks like the kind of place you'd really want to take your family. It's a much bigger park than you would expect. And this is a stock photo, but it gives you some idea what the horses look like. They're just gorgeous. I can't even imagine letting little kids ride on that now. The east end of the park, as I told you, was bought by Celoron and became Lucille Ball Memorial Park. And that's what that looks like. And it includes the Desi Arnaz Bandstand, which is way down at the eastern corner, right next to the lake. And that's about where the original dance hall was. Not anywhere near what the dance hall was. You might say it was just a shell of it. They don't get any better. We've got two statues of Lucy over in the park. The famous one. They tended to call that the Scary Lucy. They were going to take it out, and they decided, well, gosh, we want visitors to this village, so we'll leave it there, and people could come and get their picture taken next to it. But they couldn't leave it just the Scary Lucy, so they added a Pretty Lucy too. And both of them are right across the street. It's a little dark out now, but in the daytime, you might want to visit. Now that brings us to this side of the street. After the park closed, there were decades where nothing happened over here. So if anybody says, well, you shouldn't have taken out an amusement park and put in a hotel, it took 30 or 40 years to do that. This was the amusement park in between. And that's the island where they had the swings. I think at this time I might have been standing on the pilings for the theater, but I don't remember. This is 10 years ago. And this is further east, or further west. This is about where the Greyhound used to be. The hotel opened 4 years ago. So now the site has this. You can see that island, as well as the little bump out between the island and the land. And here's another view of the same thing. You didn't think you'd get away with nothing, would you? I happen to have a book, Celoron Park on Chautauqua Lake. Price is $20. I'll be happy to sign them if you want my signature on anything other than a check. And if you decide that you want a book, I also have my church's book. It's the Churches of Jamestown. And for this, I would sell them for half price, so that would be $10. And it's such a deal if you buy them together. Thank you very much for sticking with me.
That was an amazing presentation. That was very, very, we will see you, not all of you, but all of the women, I hope, on October 1st at the Marble House. Until then, enjoy the rest of the summer, and thank you for coming.